Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. If you have the brown Tanakh with you, it is Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim is on page 1730. And if someone with the blue book could tell me what page it's on, what page chapter 3 is on, you can call that out, but it's on page 1730 in the brown JPS Tanakh. Just as a recap for those who haven't been here for all of Pesach services, we've been reading Shir HaShirim as a love song to God and as a reminder not just of love in general, but of that of the first moments of love, of the intensity of the beginning of a committed relationship, and everything that we're willing to do for the other person, and all of that wave of emotions that comes at the very beginning of a relationship, of that honeymoon period, and trying to think back to our first time feeling that in relationship with God, and then also thinking of that too for those of us who have been in relationships for quite a while, channeling some of that energy from the first moments of a relationship as well, and figuring out how might this imagery inspire us in our relationships both with God and with our partners as well. So we're going to read chapter 3, and just to let you know, something to look out for in chapter 3 is this imagery. We get a lot of mentions of Shlomo, of Solomon, and I don't think that we mentioned this before, but Solomon is said to have written Shir HaShirim. In rabbinic text, Shlomo is said to have written Shir HaShirim, and he's said to have written Shir HaShirim in the spring of his life when he's young and has this kind of energy that's mentioned in the psalm. Then later, when he thinks he knows everything, when he's middle-aged or so, he writes Proverbs because he has lots of advice to give. And then when he gets even older and realizes he knows nothing, he writes Ecclesiastes or Kohelet that sends that message of, things repeat themselves, and the best thing to do is to be grateful for what I have in this moment right now. But for now, we are in the energy of Shir HaShirim. We're in the energy of spring. And so I'm curious what you think the presence of Shlomo is doing in this third chapter. There are different opinions about that. And as I've asked all of the other two chapters that we've read at Shir HaShirim together, what verse or verses are you going to bring home, or can you bring home to apply to your own life as inspiration, whether in your relationship with God or your relationship with a significant other? What verse can you catch on to today and bring with you as you go home and out into the world? So chapter 3, Shir HaShirim. Al mishkavi balelot bikashti et ahava nafshi bikashtiv velo metzativ. Does anyone have the blue book and want to share the page number for that one? 1408 in the blue book, and then again 1730 in the brown. Al mishkavi balelot bikashti et yahava nafshi bikashtiv velo metzativ akumana va'asovevair bashvakim uvarchavot avaksha et yahava nafshi bikashtiv velo metzativ metzauni hashomrim hasovevim ba'ir et she'ahava nafshi re'item kim'at she'avarti mehem ad shematzati et she'ahava nafshi achaztiv velo arpenu ad she'havetiv el beitimi ve'el cheder horati Hishpati etchem Benot Yerushalayim B'tzvaot O Be'ailot Hasadeh Im Ta'iru Ve'im Te'oreru Et She'ahavat She'techpatz Mizot Olah Min HaMidbar Ketimarot Ashan Mekuteret Mor Ulvana Mikol Avkat Rachel Hine Mitato Shali Shlomo Shishim Giborim Saviv Lah Mi Giborei Israel Kulam Achuzei Cheref Melumdei Milchama Ish Charbo Al Yerecho Mi Pachad Balelot Apirion Asalo Hamelech Shlomo Me'atzei Halvanon Amudav Asa Chesef Refidato Zahav Merkavo Argaman Tocho Ratzuf Ahava Mi Benot Yerushalayim Se'ena Ur'ena Benot Zion Ba'melech Shlomo Ba'atara She'itra lo imo B'yom Chatunato Uve'yom Simchat Libo. What verses are you taking home with you? Or are there verses in this chapter that you can take home with you? Say that again? So, upon my couch at night, I sought the one I love. I sought but found him not. A lot of people will talk about that first chapter, or that not that first chapter, but the first few verses of this chapter as the seeking out our love for God. And if we're thinking of this as a metaphor or as a symbol for our love as Israel for God, that frustration with knowing that we'll never know God fully enough. Right? We can study forever, we can pray forever, we can do all of the mitzvot, and we'll never get all of God. And I think it works with relationships too, with human relationships as well, right? The frustration in knowing that it's never going to be 100% perfect relationship where everybody agrees with everybody all the time. Maybe that exists. That would be wonderful. Right. Or those moments where we just feel like we can't find God at all. Right? And we have lots of Psalms about that too, right? That acknowledging the reality that as much as we love God and as much as we search for God, there are going to be moments when God doesn't feel like God is there. Yes, we know conceptually that God is everywhere with us all the time, but sometimes we're going to get those moments where we don't feel like God's there. It's kind of, Rabbi Elliot Dorff talks about prayer in baseball terms. He's a baseball person, I'm not, but he talks about a lot of things in baseball terms. And he says, we daven 3 times a day so that sometimes we can hit a home run with God, right? So that some days we don't even get to first base. Some days we're bored out of our minds, but we daven anyway because we know that maybe we'll get to first base, maybe we'll get to second or third, and some days we're going to have a divine experience like no other we've ever experienced and hit a home run once in a while. And so we do it, we go through the motions, and we do the mitzvot, and we say the words to God so that we can get to that home run some of the time. And so these first few verses are those times when we're seeking God and we're doing everything we can, and we still feel like we're not even getting to first base. We don't even know a little bit of who God is or can be. What about Shlomo? What is Solomon's presence doing here? So a classic interpretation is that Solomon is the lover of the poem. Right? He is the person being sought. He is the one sharing the bed. Right? But I love the interpretation. Robert Alter brings an interpretation, and he says about chapter 3, verse 7, which is, there is Solomon's couch, encircled by 60 warriors of the warriors of Israel. This line, together with the next two, looks like a grand epic flourish, describing the formidable array of guards around Solomon in his palace bedchamber. But Yair Zakovich proposes that the whole sequence is satiric, representing King Solomon's quaking in his bed out of terror in the nights, in striking contrast to the young woman in the preceding poem, who does not hesitate to go out in the night with no armed guard in search of her lover. It's kind of that comparison between King Solomon, who's got a whole bunch of different wives, right? Who doesn't feel that intensity for any one wife, and yet, and he needs 60 guards around him with swords and a fancy palace, whereas the speaker of our poem for most of Shir HaShirim is a young woman who's not afraid and who speaks about not being hidden in a palace, but rather being in nature. We talked about how Shir HaShirim really represents a lot of the different areas of natural and the climates of Israel and the plants and the animals, right? That she finds that love with her lover everywhere, right? And doesn't need all of the fancy attire and all of the guards. Right? That she represents the risks that we can take for our loved ones, or the risks that we would take for God. Right? And I think, too, especially today, right, the power of defying that terror and fear in a time when tensions are high, when we're all defensive, right? That she's a hero in her own right, in that she's, in a time when the king is surrounded by 60 guards, and when there are watchmen out looking everywhere, that she has decided that it's worth it, even through all of that, to search for the hope of finding love. Also in that comparison too, we find, if you look at verse 4 and verse 10, both of them are talking about mothers, right? They're talking about, in verse 4, the speaker of the poem, is speaking about bringing her lover to her mother's house. And Shlomo is wearing the crown that was given to him by his mother. So it's it's really a parallel. Both poems can be seen in parallel, either as two very different but similar experiences, or as the experience of really somebody who is truly deeply in love no matter where she is, compared to Shlomo, who needs these guards surrounding him. Other reflections or points you want to take home from today? So tomorrow we'll read the 4th chapter of Shir HaShirim, and I hope that we can continue to take little tidbits from Shir HaShirim, both for our relationships with God and our relationships with our loved ones out in the world too. A Musaf today.